Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the IBMC Sunday Dharma talk. This morning, we're going to lead a little bit about the loving kindness meditation. Venerable Panyaloka is going to do it. Before that, I want to say a few words. Welcome again, our good friends, newcomers, everybody to this service. And recently I received an email from Jeannie. I think you remember Jeannie and her husband, Hideki. Japanese couple used to come to the temple. The Hideki was in hospital, minor stroke. We wish him speed recover. By the power of the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, by the power of all the meritorious activities we're doing, you all be well and happy. So now, Venerable Panyaloka is going to lead a little bit about the 2 minutes about the loving kindness meditation. After that, we do few minutes, 2-3 minutes loving kindness meditation. After that, Subodha, Upasaka Subodha is going to give a Dhamma talk. He's long time IBMC friend, and I believe Subodha was ready. Venerable Panyaloka, that's for you right now.
Close your eyes. Sit in a comfortable position. Let your body be relaxed. Let your mind be relaxed. And reflect upon these words. May I be well and happy, peaceful and free from suffering. May no harm come to me. May no difficulties come to me. May no problems come to me. May I always find fulfillment. May I also have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome the inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. May my teachers, my parents, my brothers and sisters, friends and relatives, may my enemies, may all beings in the universe, from the highest realm of existence to the lowest, may all beings arisen in these realms, with form and without form, with perception and without perception, with consciousness and without consciousness. May they be well and happy, peaceful and free from suffering. May no harm come to them. May no difficulties come to them. May no problems come to them. May they always find fulfillment. May the suffering ones be suffering free. May the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief. May all beings be well, happy, and peaceful. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Now it's time for the Subodha. Below Subodha there. Subodha, are you there?
Yes, I am, Bante. Okay.
Subodha, you can start your Dhamma talk. You have roughly around half hour, 35 minutes, then after question and answer. So you can start your Dhamma talk right now, Subodha.
Thank you, Bante. I pay homage to the Buddha. I pay homage to the Dhamma. I pay homage to the Sangha. Okay. So, 8 months or so of quarantine. There have been riots and fires and crazy politics and all sorts of weird stuff going on. And now here we are on a Sunday. And who's this guy? Looks like Tom Hanks from Castaway, only better fed. You know, we're just going to do our best today. So welcome. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. So today's talk is for everyone, but it's especially for those who have had it rough these last few months. A lot of feelings, a lot of concerns, a lot of anxieties. But it's also for the people who've been telling everyone, including themselves, that they're just fine. It's just been business as usual, no problems. You ask them how they're doing, great. They've picked up a lot of new hobbies and habits, learning how to make sourdough bread, the whole thing. And the thing is, this has been going on for a while now. So we've moved past the watching of Tiger King and learning how to make sourdough bread and all the hobbies and all the distractions. And it just keeps marching on, doesn't it? Because I think we all started out pretty optimistic. Everyone was willing to work together. And now it seems like less people are working together, less people are getting along. Some of us who have been adhering to guidelines for a long time feeling a little stir crazy. Meanwhile, we're watching people go get eggs Benedict and mimosas with their friends like life's going on like usual, and we don't know how to make sense of it all. So, in the midst of all of that, all this craziness of these last few months, I thought I'd give a talk on integrity. Now, integrity isn't a word you hear a lot in Buddhism. There are much more popular words that sound much more esoteric and mystical and mysterious, like mindfulness and loving kindness and concentration. But I do think that a lot of what we talk about in terms of Buddhism can be understood in regard to integrity. Now, we're probably familiar with the most common definition of integrity, which is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles, moral uprightness. And I'll talk about that too. But there's also this other sense that perhaps is more immediate for us right now on the inside, which is the state of being whole and undivided. So I'm going to try to talk about both of those. We'll see how I do. But in the first sense of integrity, I think we all know what that means, especially as Buddhists who might be trying to follow precepts, thinking of their life in terms of skillfulness and unskillfulness. And we can begin to do those things a bit reflexively. So long as we're following the precepts, so long as we find time to meditate, yeah, good, we're doing those things. But integrity has a lot to do also with honesty, and not just in terms of communication with others, in terms of skillful speech, it's there. But the honesty I have in mind is the kind of talk we have internally with ourselves, the honesty we bring to our immediate moment, the honesty we bring to ourselves in terms of how we're doing cognitively, emotionally. And, this is probably the worst time in history for social media to exist, because all we have at our fingertips is a stream of news that is just doom scrolling. We just scroll through it all and take it all in, and things seem to be bad. But then we look at all these social media influencers, and apparently this is the best time, because now there's time to work on those six-pack abs you've always been working on, right? Now's the time to try the new diet. Now's the time to try the new workout. Now's the time to do a bunch of stuff and be busy and busy and busy and busy. And I don't know, I haven't approached this time thinking this was a time to be busy. I had another kind of busyness in mind, which has its own faults, maybe. The kind of busyness of a Buddhist. Man, what a great time to practice. I'm going to meditate a bunch. I'm going to study a whole lot. I'm just going to dedicate myself to the Dharma even more. And some of you also might have thought of doing those things. And then you end up being surprised by how much of that time ends up being more like Netflix, YouTube videos, pizza, just like knee deep in nachos, man, And that's human. That's a response to a new term I came across. I hadn't heard it before, but ambiguous loss. And that's exactly right, because many of us are grieving the lives we used to have. We're grieving the lives we thought we'd have. We're grieving what could have been, what would have been, so on. For me, I thought I was going to go on a bunch of cool retreats, spend the summer visiting different monasteries, all sorts of fun activities I had in mind. And then once all of that was taken away, I was very, very optimistic. I thought, oh, so much time to practice, so much time to study. And I did some of that, but I also did what a lot of other people are doing too, which is grieving. So a part of that honesty that we bring to the Buddhist practice is being okay with grief. We have a tendency to think that we have to put on a strong face, that we have to sort of fake it until we make it in terms of equanimity, in terms of being balanced and having an equipoised mind, as if we're not supposed to be affected by things or not feel things. But a lot of that equanimity comes from facing things head on and having enough honesty to look in the shadows and dark places of our minds. That's how you get to the equanimity. Because if you read the Pali Canon, you go to the oldest teachings of the Buddha, you find that equanimity looks more like patience. It looks more like perseverance. It looks more like understanding what's within our control and what is outside of our control. And I also find similar teachings like that within Stoicism. Some of you already know that I have a background in Western philosophy as well. And so I've always been drawn to the Stoics and Neoplatonists and philosophers like that really hammer in the point that our lives work best when we understand what's within our scope of control and what's outside our scope of control. And this lab set we're given with to experiment on is this body, this very mind, that oftentimes that's the scope of our control. What we can work with, what we can work on, what things we can cultivate are usually within ourselves. And, that sounds like a kind of busyness, and it can be. Some people approach it that way. They approach it in terms of activities, a lot of chanting, a lot of meditating, a lot of other things they do, various forms of giving. And all of that is good. All of that is useful. But how many of us have actually looked inside and taken an honest assessment of how we're feeling right now, how we're doing? Sometimes some of us study Buddhism very thoroughly. I'm one of those guys, man. I'm a huge nerd. I read all this stuff. I study all the passages, fill my head with a lot of concepts. And now studying Buddhism at the graduate level, even more so, right? And all this study has shown me that the best way to benefit from Buddhism is not in studying, but in practicing. And that we study for the benefit of the practice. I remember one time one of my teachers was asked a question by someone who was an aspiring monk. He wanted to ordain. And he says, I'm going to be ordaining pretty soon. And I've been wondering, how much of my day should I spend studying the suttas? And how much of my time should I spend in actual practice, meditating and walking around and, all this stuff, actually putting stuff into practice? And I had a feeling that this aspiring monk thought that the answer from the teacher would be, spend half your day studying, reading all the books, reading all the suttas, reading all the passages, the commentaries, and then maybe 40 minutes meditation in the evenings or something. And the advice was actually the exact opposite. The advice was, hey, maybe read like a page a day and spend the rest of the day in practice. And that's quite startling if you're new to Buddhism and you got all the books, you bought them on Amazon, you got all the Nikayas, you got all the teachers, Western and Eastern alike, and you got bookmarks ready to go and you're ready to delve in. And my advice to anyone new to Buddhism would be study just enough to practice and then practice. And then as you need more, as your practice deepens, study a bit more, read a bit more, talk to teachers, listen to their advice, but then always come back to the practice. And so that is one good thing that has come from this crazy situation, is that we have more grist for the mill, as they say. We got more stuff to work with. But even that is kind of an illusion, because in truth, any time of our lives is good for practice, even our happiest moments. Because we have to keep in mind that in Buddhist cosmology, all the people in the heaven realms, all the gods and holy spirits that are in that system are in as much need of the Dharma as any demon or hungry ghost or anyone suffering in hell realms. And even if you don't believe in that part of Buddhism, there's still this notion that the Dharma is good for you all the time, not just when you're sad, not just when you're lonely, not just when you're hurting. Because what we call the three poisons in Buddhism exist all the time. Or rather, sorry, the three marks of existence. Three poisons or something else, but they're there all the time too. The three marks of existence are there all the time. And, the thing is, people learn the three marks of existence, and they have a tendency to approach it a very philosophical way. And trust me, I'm sympathetic to that. I'm a lot like that too. So we have a tendency to look at impermanence and suffering and not self as philosophical things to understand, or mystical things to experience or have deep penetrating insight into. Now, I'm not one of those guys that completely wipes the slate clean and says that Buddhism is completely secular and there's no room for mysticism in there. I'm actually one of those guys that still holds to a soteriological view of Buddhism. That's just a fancy way of saying that I think that Buddhism ultimately leads to salvation. I actually think that Nibbana is a real thing. But I think that the road to Nibbana is much more practical than people have been led to believe, because they do approach the three marks of existence as very philosophical. But the thing is, it's in the practice that we look into impermanence and suffering or stress and not self. Then in a lot of ways, there are value judgments we place on the things we think will lead to happiness, that we think will lead to our benefit. Not just things to kind of understand on an intellectual level. Because how do we combat craving and clinging by intellectualizing? You have a friend with a drinking problem. Like, hey, Mark, that beer you're drinking has no substantial self. It has no permanence. He goes, well, I mean, I kind of knew it's a Bud Light. I knew it was low-cal, so I can see no substance there. No, we don't combat craving and clinging by thinking about impermanence. Rather, a more radical way of looking at an impermanence is realizing that the very things in this world, including ourselves and our mind, are inconstant, right? Rather than impermanent, inconstant. And so what that means is they're unreliable forms of happiness in the long term. That doesn't mean they won't make us happy. Man, I've never had a pizza that'll let me down, but it's inconstant. It's unreliable. It's not going to make me happy forever. And all those things that we think make us happy, all those things that we feed ourselves with, and it's not just food, it's just an easy thing to look at, but all the various things that we feed and try to find nourishment from are things that are inconstant in this realm of samsara, right? They're things that will not be reliable all the time. Not our health, not our beauty, not our minds, not even the tools of Buddhism itself. All these tools that we have in our toolbox are technically conditioned things, fabrications, sankharas. So even the tools, the ladder with which we're climbing up, are ultimately unreliable. They just need to be reliable enough to get us over to the other side, right? Because no raft stays afloat forever. It's just got to be afloat long enough to get us to the other side. That's the idea. So inconstancy in terms of its reliableness means that all of these inconstant things are stressful. Stressful in that they're not always going to be good. Stressful in ways they're not always going to be perfect. Stressful in ways that we can't trust. If you can't trust something, it's not reliable, you can't count on it for your happiness. It's stressful. And then that takes us to the third value judgment. In terms of inconstancy and stress, we find that things are not worth putting selfhood into, claiming as our own. So not self, rather than being a very mystical conception of emptiness, people view it that way. And there's a lot of literature that agrees with that viewpoint, especially from Nagarjuna forward. But what I have found in the Pali Canon, in the very early teachings, is that the way the Buddha often talks about not self is also in terms of just looking at the things we usually value, the things we cling onto, the things we crave, the things we own as me or mine. And there are often things in the world that aren't really worth that, not worth claiming, especially our philosophies, our ideologies, our views and thoughts about ourselves. They're usually not worth carrying on and owning as this is me. So, in view of that, with that kind of honesty, we can look at ourselves and look at our thoughts and our actions in terms of skillfulness, but not in any kind of heavy-handed way. Remember that other definition I read of integrity is the state of being whole and undivided. A teacher of mine talks about the mind as a committee, that we don't have a single mind with a single will or thought or direction. Instead, we have a committee of idiots up here thinking they all know what's best for us. And they're all just chatting away, trying to make us do one thing or another, pulling us this way, pulling us that way, pulling us left, right, doesn't matter. And the ones that often win out are the ones that lead towards some kind of immediate gratification, something that eases our suffering just enough for right now. So integrity ends up being, in this case, looking at the mind and seeing what qualities are worth investing in, worth developing, and which voices in our head are worth listening to and strengthening, giving them the microphone, and moving away from immediate and instant gratification to something that's more long-term and more stable, a kind of happiness that maybe is less exciting, right? Because Buddhism has Nibbana as the goal. It doesn't have Coachella as the goal, you know? So like it leads us down this path where the kind of stable happiness we have is something that is more likened to peace, right? And peace is so satisfying when you actually have these moments of peace. They often happen in meditation, but they don't always need to. That you have these moments of peace and rapture. Rapture usually starts first, and then it eases into peace. And then you have a stable place for the mind to rest. And finally, take a breath. And how necessary is that right now? Because doesn't it feel like all of us collectively right now are holding our breath? We're just holding it in and waiting for a chance to like exhale when like it's okay. Because that's part of that ambiguous loss a lot of us are facing right now. There's no real sense of like when it's okay to just be okay. And meditation gives us a place to rest. It gives us a place to rest. And then from that resting point, look and survey the landscape of our mind, and look at what's worth working with, what's worth encouraging, what's worth nurturing. Because, I've said it before that Buddhism is a lot like being a gardener. You gotta work on the land. You gotta till all that soil. You gotta pull out the weeds. And you gotta plant seeds that are worth planting, so that you got something to harvest later on that's worth harvesting, right? A bunch of dandelions are going to help you so much. You need some like butternut squash or something, you know? And so that's what we're doing. Those tools we have, we develop them. And those voices we have that encourage us to be truthful, to be kind, to be compassionate, to be wise, those are the ones we work with. And we're all familiar with all this stuff, which is why I'm not using a Buddhist term right now. I'm using the word integrity instead, because we've all grown up hearing that word, integrity. And we often imagine someone with moral fiber, someone who really stands their ground and does what's right. And yeah, that's kind of the right attitude in terms of our practice. Whether you're a Buddhist or not, whether you're someone who contemplates, meditates, it's still the same idea that you find out what you value, you find out what's worth pursuing, and then you pursue it. And speaking of Stoic philosophy, it reminds me of Marcus Aurelius, who says, stop debating or contemplating or arguing about what a good man is, be one. And that's true of anyone on the Buddhist path, that we can really ruminate in a lot of ideas and concepts and wonder how it is that we become someone with goodwill and someone with compassion and someone with sympathetic joy and equanimity. Well, the how is by doing. Practice makes perfect. These are skills we're developing, skills that we're working on. And that's how it's done. So this is absolutely a good time to practice. but any time would have been good. Even if all this stuff wasn't happening the way it's happening now, we'd still have the ability to introspect, to look inside, and to really make these value judgments about what is reliable, what is actually true happiness, and how we go about making that happiness happen. Because the thing is, we learn about stuff like not self and emptiness and things like that, and we think that we have to apply those concepts immediately, that craving and clinging are given up by just like kind of cold turkey. I don't crave anything, I don't want anything, I'm good just as is. And man, that's a bunch of horse dookie. It's not real, right? That's called spiritual bypassing. That's convincing yourself you have achieved something before you've actually achieved it. So that means that for a lot of us, there's going to be a whole lot of craving and clinging and a whole lot of like unwholesome mind states all the way up to the end. In fact, one of the last things to go for someone who becomes an arahant is like conceit, which is like a measure of like how much better you are than other people on the path. Like, wow, I'm like super good at this meditation stuff. I like really achieved some things and really that's one of the last things to go for someone who's really developed on the path. Go figure. But yeah, it's true. So we have a lot of craving and clinging, and what do? Do we give it up cold turkey? No. We train our minds to crave after things that are worth craving. And so this was actually a discussion I had with my wife probably a couple months ago, where she says, okay, well, if Buddhists are supposed to give up all this stuff, like what do they do for like fun? What do they do that like, what are they supposed to cling to then? And I said, well, at first they cling to Buddhism itself and the practice, and especially meditation. Meditation is a wholesome thing to crave initially, especially if you're meditating well. So I often take issue with the view of meditation as this thing you have to struggle and strive through, that it should be uncomfortable, it should be unpleasant, your mind should just be screaming at you the whole time. And I don't take that view of meditation at all. I do see meditation as something, when cultivated the right way, gives you enough ease, enough pleasure, and enough peace that it's something that you want to return to again and again. It's like a well that you return to when you're thirsty. And it's from there you can survey the mind. It's from there that you can make better choices. Because if you're just spinning around like everyone else, you're not going to have that clarity to make different choices. And certainly not clarity to know which voice in the committee of the mind is worth listening to. So that's how we do it. And it's not very exciting. Go figure. It's not as exciting as watching, Tiger King on Netflix. It's not as exciting as drinking or dancing or a lot of other things people like to do. It's not as exciting as brunch and getting some waffles and a mimosa or whatever. But it's much more stable. It's much more reliable. Because ultimately, we start off, well, I should say at first, we start off by taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. But we work towards making ourselves a refuge. It's something that comes from the outside, and we work it inward until we are that safe place for ourselves and others. In fact, one of the encouragements for following the precepts is that you become safe for other people. But as you really start developing these qualities, these wholesome, skillful qualities in Buddhism, you become a safe place for yourself, and a much safer place to actually look at the shadowy parts of your mind, to look at the parts that scared you before, the parts that you denied about yourself. You got to shine a light all the way around. And the Buddha even said this, that in meditation, you get to a certain point where you do have more clarity, and you have a luminosity that wasn't there before, that was obscured by things like defilements, by these tendencies that we have in the mind that obscure these kind of qualities. So we work on the mind, adding more light to it over time, casting light on the shadows until all the shadows are gone. And that means that we look at how the last few months have gone for us. It means we apply honesty to it. Are we doing what we need to do? Are we doing what we want to do? And are we looking for something reliable? And The answer for some of us is probably like, you know what? No, I started out strong. I was doing all sorts of cool stuff. I was making my own sourdough and I was keeping busy, but I wasn't looking inward. And I also wasn't allowing myself to grieve. And that's a big thing. A lot of people right now, not even wanting to admit that there's anything to grieve about. Not anything to admit that we've lost, not to admit anything that we're afraid of. A lot of us are afraid to admit that we're afraid, especially if we're like spiritual people. It's hard to admit that we still have room to grow. But that's the point. Being honest means being accountable. And so we always have to be looking at how we can improve our minds. That's the development. Not in a harsh way. There are people out there who are real taskmasters, and they'll take this same advice and turn it into something really dark. Another way to chastise themselves and beat themselves up. Anything that you take from Buddhism, I would recommend holding lightly. Apply just enough. Apply just enough to help. Because in the end, you are your refuge. The Buddha said this himself, that you can get all the advice, you can get all the lessons, but the practice is your practice. The practice is what you do, what you think, how you are in the world. No one can do that for you. So we're all in the business as Buddhists of becoming our own refuge. We build the raft to the other shore with our thoughts and our actions. So I think that's a good place to stop. If there are questions, I would love to hear them.
Thank you, Subodha. If you have any question, please ask right now.
I don't have a question, but I have more of a comment. And then if you could comment on my comment, that'd be great. I see a screen popped up here. Gotta get rid of that. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your talk very much. When I first started getting into Buddhism, I would say, oh, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that. I stopped playing chess for a year, and then I wouldn't watch like some things are a waste of time, and you had mentioned something about that, about things not being permanent. So my idea currently is that like, for example, if you watch a favorite sports team, you don't you let it go. You don't get stuck in it. It's just for enjoyment for a little bit of a time. I understand that it's a distraction, but is it really? Because couldn't you have a certain frame of mind doing something? I'm wishing, for example, the other person plays well on chess and you are happy for them. The other sports team as well. You don't have so much involvement in winning. It's just pure enjoyment. But what are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, in terms of your sports analogy, you asked absolutely the wrong guy, man. I don't watch sports at all. But I will say this.
Any kind
No. I know. The thing is, we start wherever it is we are, right? And so it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. People say that all the time. And that's still true of Buddhism, that the ultimate goal, at least for someone like me in the Theravada tradition, is to become an arahant, is to reach nibbana. But in the reality, in the practice of it, who's to say how close I am? Probably, I don't know. But the point is, everyone starts from where they are, and everyone continues from where they are right now. And so that's what I was saying about stopping things cold turkey. We don't give up things because we're trying to, cause ourselves more suffering and more strife in the immediate moment for some gratification down the road. I would argue that's kind of a very Christian, even Catholic mindset, kind of the martyrdom thing. We're like, I got to suffer now for some award down the line. The idea is that we practice enough that over time, the practice alone is satisfying. But in the meantime, we enjoy the things that we enjoy, so long as we make sure that whatever we do isn't causing harm to ourselves or others. And then we just continue to refine our palate. Not everyone takes to Brussels sprouts right away. They got to eat them a few times, really get a taste for them. And then they realize the Brussels sprouts are much more nourishing than the cotton candy they were eating. There's one teacher that talks about developing a taste for the path as trading in candy for gold in terms of its benefit to us. But, maybe you don't give up the candy all right away. You trade in one candy for a speck of gold at a time until finally all the candy's gone and you're left with a pile of gold, right? And I think that's the same idea, that we're not trying to martyr ourselves and completely give things up until we have nothing to enjoy in life. It's just simply a matter of enjoying our lives and enjoying the fruits of the path, and then developing the path until we no longer need those other kinds of enjoyment. But it's a process. It takes, according to the Buddha, lifetimes. So for us to try to do it all in one, it's quite a bit. And sometimes it requires sacrifice if that's what we want, if that's the voice that ends up being the loudest. But then those sacrifices are worthwhile and they don't feel like sacrifices. If it feels like a sacrifice, then it's not time yet. Then more gentleness is required and more understanding, more honesty, integrity.
Right.
That's what I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, Piri, you can ask.
Thank you. And thank you for your time with this talk. I appreciate that. You were talking about how it may not be worth or isn't worth having, attachment to our political views, ownership of those, as in defining ourselves. And that was really interesting to me because my political views are in accordance with my values, my ethics. And it's something that I'm proud of. However, I recognize that, especially these last 4 years, my views have brought me a lot of suffering because I am really attached to them, and it feels like a never-ending battle with never-ending suffering around it. So how does one go about maintaining those same values while not having it be such a core piece to their persona?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, and I would say that you're definitely not alone in that, especially with Buddhists that really define themselves in their Buddhism, and also in terms of people who define themselves by their political views. Now, the thing is, we do things that are right ultimately because they're right. And so whether we study Eastern philosophy in terms of Buddhism or Western philosophy, we find in some cases with Western philosophy, people that were politicians and yet still chose to hold their views in a light way, understanding that they do what is right because they feel it's right, they know it to be right, but then are not defined by it. And what I mean by that is that if we take ownership of these views and claim them as me and mine, they can become something stressful, like you were describing. And so we look at the world and we look at what we view and what we see and what we do, and we make value judgments and we make choices. We look at what is within our power to do and what we can influence and what we can encourage in others. And beyond that, I would say we have to apply equanimity, not in an uncaring way. There are some people who hear equanimity and think that's just a way of being checked out. I understand equanimity to be more in terms of patience, understanding that some change takes a long time. And equanimity in terms of understanding what things are actually possible in the moment. And if they are possible and worth doing, do them. I would say that without hesitance, that whatever it is we value in life, whatever we think is worth doing, and whatever values we think are worth upholding and encouraging others to adopt is worth all of that. But also recognizing what falls outside of our power, and recognizing that if we own it, if we hold it too closely, if we cling to it, it can then become a source of our suffering. Because it's not just greed and aversion, delusion that becomes painful when we hold on to it. Anything, including Buddhism itself, ultimately, as we go further down the path, if we continue to hold on too tightly. So someone who's almost awakened, if they can't even give up Buddhism in the end, they'll let go of the raft, they're still holding onto the raft, and there's no other shore. Now, that's like, for a lot of us, way, way ahead. We're all in the cling to Buddhism part. That's perfectly well. But what I mean is that we hold on to things when they're worth holding on to. We hold them lightly when it's time to hold them lightly, and we let go when it's time to let go. And that would be my understanding of equanimity. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Next question, John.
Hi, Stephen. First off, I just want to say thank you for speaking today. I always love your Dharma talks. They really are impactful, and I really connect with them. So thank you for doing that. I guess part of the problem for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, is you mentioned wanting to kind of quiet the impulses in the brain that cause suffering and strengthen and reinforce the ones that don't. It's like a monkey mind, right? Like in my case, I keep getting pulled into habit patterns that cause suffering and go against what I want, and I keep giving into them. Like it's hard to say no to some of the impulses, whether that's excessively snacking, or whether that's impulsively procrastinating when I'm trying to get my work done from home where there's no more boundaries, to things that can be more harmful. So I guess the question is, I know there's things like support groups and there's things you can work, but like some of these things are more mundane. Like there's impulses that are ingrained in my brain that I can't, I don't seem to have the power to let pass by. Even though I meditate every day, I pray every day. And this hasn't always been the case. I feel like the anxiety that I'm trying to escape from, and the kind of the lack of boundaries of working from home 24/7. And now I'm in the process of forming my own company. So I don't have like a ton of people that I'm accountable to or socially accountable of that I used to have. So I'm kind of on my own a lot more. And I'm finding it really difficult to be able to do that, to reinforce, so like let the harmful impulses pass by and reinforce the positive ones. So especially when we all have these like digital gadgets in our pockets that you can spend hours of your day going down rabbit holes. So I just didn't know if there's a way to like reinforce or set boundaries or anything you recommend through Buddhist practice to do what you were suggesting.
Yeah, a lot of what you're saying reminds me of what I was commenting on earlier about the committee. So there's one teacher in particular that really talks about the committee a lot. And I like this view because it brings to light the fact that we can want something and not want it at the exact same time. So basically, we can want the wholesome thing and the unwholesome thing. Sometimes it feels like equally, or one overrides the other, and it's sometimes the unwholesome or the unskillful, right? So in terms of skillfulness, we have so many voices in our head Some encouraging skillful behavior, others encouraging unskillful behavior. And the fact is, you're aware that that is going on, that there's that tension in the mind. And so that awareness can be the seed that's planted that leads towards making different choices. And that accountability I was talking about is so spot on, because a lot of us were more accountable when we were out and about in the world a lot more. But now that most of our life is in our homes and on screens, it's like some of that accountability wears away. And what we're left with is the hard part, being accountable to ourselves, which is a part of the integrity I was talking about. Because ultimately, that's who we're indebted to. That's who we got to look out for. That's the person that ultimately looks at our decisions and knows our thoughts more than anyone else. That's us. We're the ones we got to be accountable to. And that's why we need to be our own refuge. Right? So that accountability starts within. And it sounds like that's already happening. Otherwise, you wouldn't have that kind of tension. Someone who's just so immersed in unskillfulness, they don't have that reflective moment very often, I would say, where they go, hey, hold on, I'm giving into a lot of these automatic habits. And that's the path. Ultimately, the way we combat craving and clinging is changing our habits. And that's sometimes for us a really long and slow battle, especially if those habits are deeply ingrained. And you can have someone who's practiced for 20, 30 years, 40 years, and they're still combating some of the deepest, most ingrained habits. But that's the path that we're all on. So in that way, you're in good company. And then I think
thank you. Next one is for Vincent.
Good morning, Subodha. Thank you so much. I've seen another Dharma talk. You came out to Long Beach Meditation Center one time.
Oh, yeah, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, and it's really good to see you again. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the practice more than study. A Thai forest monk who speaks to that, and this added some more clarification, where he used the example of a young man who had approached him who was really full of a lot of the specifics of the practice, but and he sort of likened him to a person going around a chicken coop and picking up the droppings rather than the eggs. And that sort of landed a lot of clarity to me. Thank you so much. On the point of meditation, and are you more for quality or quantity when it comes to sitting practice?
Well, I would say quality matters more than quantity, because if you have like 5 good minutes of really, really solid meditation and then struggle for 20, 30 minutes of it where it feels like you're going to the dentist, then what's the point? Because you can build on the good part of the meditation. You can build on that 5 minutes, and over time it becomes 10, then it becomes 20, then it becomes 30. And then you can very easily sit for a whole hour without the mind complaining in any way, without the body complaining in any way. But if you force yourself for the sake of forcing it, because like, man, I really need to be a 45-minute meditator, then what you're building in your mind is a resistance to meditation. You're convincing yourself that meditation is something that is not pleasant, not fun, not nourishing. It becomes a point of stress. So I would definitely say you start with that sweet spot where you end the meditation where, like, you know what, I could do another 5, but you don't. And then you leave yourself wanting more, because it's like I was saying, that craving and clinging is something we abandon at the end. But at this stage, for a lot of us, it's worth craving meditation. So like I'd say, yeah, if you can do a solid 30, do 25. And you'll find that 25 becomes 45 before you even have time to think about it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Subodha. I think time is running very fast. Thank you, Subodha, and thank you all the members who participate for the program today. We're going to chanting few minutes. And before that, I just want to say a few things again. Next week, next Sunday, I believe the Kashanti is going to give a Dhamma talk. And thank you again, Subodha. We're going to chant a few minutes, page 3 and page 10. And some little bit chanting, Pali chanting, blessing for everybody to protect from everywhere, every way. By the power of the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, you all be well, happy and peaceful. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
නමෝ තස්ස භගවතු අරහතෝ සම්මා සංබුද්දස්ස නමෝ තස්ස භගවතු අරහතෝ සම්මා සංබුද්දස්ස නමෝ තස්ස භගවතු අරහතෝ සම්මා සංබුද්දස්ස ඉතිපිසෝ භගවාන් අරහං සම්මා සංබුද්ධෝ විජ්ජාචරණ සංපන්නෝ සුගතෝ ලෝකවිදු පුරිස ධම්ම සාරති සත්තා දේව මනුස්සානං බුද්ධෝ භගවාති ස්වාක්ඛාතෝ භගවතා ධම්මෝ සංදිට්ඨිකෝ අකාලිකෝ ඒහි පස්සිකෝ ඕපනයිකෝ පච්චත්තං වේදිතබ්බෝ විඤ්ඤෝහිති සුපටිපන්නෝ භගවතෝ ශාවක සංඝෝ උජුපටිපන්නෝ භගවත ශාවක සංඝෝ ඥාය පටිපන්නෝ භගවතෝ ශාවක සංඝෝ සාමීචි පටි භගවතෝ ශාවක සංඝෝ යදිදං චත්තාරි පුරිස යුගානි අට්ඨ පුරිස පුංගලායේස භගවතෝ ශාවක ආහුනේයෝ පාහුනේයෝ දක්ඛිනේයෝ අංජලි කරණීයෝ අනුත්තරං පුඤ්ඤක්කෙත්තං ලෝකස්සාති සම්බීතියෝ විවජ්ජන්තු සබ්බ රෝගෝ විනාශ මාතේ භවතු අන්තරායෝ සුඛී දීඝායුකෝ භව. Being numberless, I vow to save them all. Deluding passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. Dharma gates are limitless. I vow to study them all. Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to attain it. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief. Nguyện di sự công đức phổ cập nhất thiết ngã đẳng dự chúng sanh giai cộng than Phật đạo. Nguyện di thực công đức phổ cập
nhạc thế ngã đằng dự chung sanh giai cộng than Phật đạo nguyện di tự công đức phổ cập nhạc thế ngã đằng dự chung sanh giai cộng than Phật đạo. Thank you again for everybody, especially for all the members of our temple. We wish for everybody good health, long life, happiness, and for all the monks here. Thank you again, all the monks and Mr. Nam and our cameraman. I don't know, cameraman or technician or whoever. Ashan, thank you again, and hope to see you next week, next Sunday. Thanks again. By the power of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, you all be well, happy, and peaceful. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.